In my experience in this industry, I've come across roughly 4 types of candidates when it comes to the prelims examination. Unwilling to prepare and also underprepared or unprepared at the same time. Then there are candidates who are willing to work hard but find themselves unprepared or underprepared. Then there are candidates who are willing to work hard but they just simply cannot crack the prelims code. And then the 4th category of aspirants are people who are willing to work hard and who are razor sharp at cracking the prelims examination. This session essentially is about approaching the prelims examination, what should be the correct approach to approaching the prelims examination, and also some important questions which will be taken up in this session will be primarily around how many questions to attempt, which questions to skip. Hello dear learners, good morning and welcome to the session on how to correctly approach the prelims examination. Allow me to introduce myself. Those of you who know me already know me as the teacher with the weird name, and they're not wrong. My name is 𝐑𝐄𝐂𝐿 Kaul and I will be taking Indian economy classes at PW OnlyIAS starting right in 2026 batch, end of this April onwards. Now a brief about my educational background. I come from the state of Jammu and Kashmir, which is where I did my early schooling from, and then I went to BITS Pilani. I did my graduation in Electrical and Electronics Engineering from BITS Pilani, batch of 2007. Thereafter, I worked for a bunch of multinational companies and some very successful startups now. Alongside, I had been preparing for civil services and I've taken this exam roughly 5 times. I've written mains 4 times and I've been in the industry for about 8 years now. In my experience in this industry, I've come across roughly 4 types of candidates when it comes to the prelims examination. There are candidates who are unwilling to prepare, which is to say who are unwilling to work hard and also underprepared or unprepared at the same time. Then there are candidates who are willing to work hard but find themselves unprepared or underprepared. Then there are candidates who are willing to work hard but they just simply cannot crack the prelims code. They are doing everything in their capacity to be able to clear the prelims just so they can get to write the mains examination and continue to move to the personality test thereafter. But they find it very difficult somehow to clear the prelims examination. And then the 4th category of aspirants are people who are willing to work hard and who are razor sharp at cracking the prelims examination. This session essentially is about approaching the prelims examination, what should be the correct approach to approaching the prelims examination, and also some important questions which will be taken up in this session will be primarily around how many questions to attempt, which questions to skip. Now, for candidates who come as a part of this category, which is to say candidates which are or who are unwilling to work hard, candidates who find themselves unprepared, there's not a lot that I have to tell them. Only that this examination has a selection ratio of roughly around 0.2%, which means that for every 1,000 aspirants who are writing this examination, only 2 of them are going to get selected in the final list. Now, an examination which is hyper competitive, in this examination, if your attitude is one where you do not want to work hard and yet you want to be a part of the echelons of power in the Indian bureaucracy, well, good luck to you. You will have to be able to work very hard. You will have to be willing to put in the extra effort just so you become a part of these 2 candidates out of every 1,000 candidates who are writing this examination. Because you do not fix things which are not broken. Essentially about these 2 kinds of candidates. First, people who are willing to work very hard but somehow find themselves unprepared. Now, there can be numerous reasons as to why somebody who is willing to put in the extra effort just finds himself or herself unprepared or underprepared right before the examination. Now, amongst the many reasons, one of the few reasons could be that they have spoken to many people and they have gotten many opinions. They have tried to look up for many resources. They are interested in picking up every new book or every new resource which is being spoken about in the market, and they find themselves deeply confused as to what will be the correct strategy in terms of approaching their prelims examination. Now, there are another category of aspirants, people who are willing to work hard and they are doing many things which are right, yet cannot crack the prelims code. Now, for these two categories of candidates rather, I propose a very simple 3-step procedure. There are some non-negotiable elements, which is to say, things that you just cannot compromise on. If you want to be very, very good at clearing the prelims examination, these are your 3 non-negotiables. The first non-negotiable is previous year's question papers, followed by subscription to a test series and knowing how to calibrate your attempt, how many questions to attempt, which questions to skip. And finally, and one of the most underrated, one of the most important points is how do you analyze your scores once you start to take those tests. Now, the first step is deeply important, which is about previous year's question papers. Reasons as to why one should be deeply interested in the previous year's question papers is that any aspirant who wants to clear this examination should first look at the previous year's question papers and try to look at their level of difficulty. Try to look at the cutoffs for each year. Try to find reasons behind any trend line in those cutoffs. And then try to look for changes as may have occurred over the course of time, especially when it comes to the kind of questions which are being asked. Now, the first thing is very, very important, which is where you pick up previous year's question papers and you try to assess what is the level of difficulty. Needless to say here that you will be only able to assess the level of difficulty of previous year's question papers once you have reasonably covered the topics therein. Now, I have tried to make things simple for you, and I've tried to introduce a slide in here which speaks about cutoffs for various years. Now, I have selected question papers starting 2013, and we are going till the latest prelims examination, which is that of 2024. If you look at the cutoffs very clearly, try to forget the first 2 years, which is 2013 and 2014. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that precisely for the reason because in 2013 and 2014, CSAT used to be accounted for, which is why you will find the cutoff to be somewhere closer to 241 as well as 205. Now, starting 2015, it was only General Studies 1 that mattered. Now, you have to be interested in the cutoffs since 2015 itself. If you look at the cutoff since 2015, it was 107.34 in the year 2015. In 2016, the cutoff shot up to 116. Then there was a sharp decline till about 105.34 in the following year. And especially since 2018, you would have seen that the cutoffs have been sub 100. If you can see it clearly, 98 for 2 consecutive years, then it drops down to 92.51, then it drops down to 87.54, 88.22, then it furthermore drops down to its lowest, which is about 75.41. I would request you to remember the cutoffs for each year, and I would also request you to try and analyze what could have been the possible reasons behind this sharp decline in cutoff, especially in the last 4 to 5 odd years. You will start to notice that there are some patterns in here. The first pattern, when you look at the cutoff increasing from 107.34 to about 116, is precisely this element. Questions were asked from current affairs, and questions were asked from current affairs from your conventional sources, which is to say questions were asked from the Hindu, questions were asked from the Indian Express, and aspirants spend a decent amount of their time preparing for current affairs, which is why when questions are straight up asked from those, typically you will find that the good aspirants are not going to lose marks there if the questions have been rather straightforward. Now, if you can clearly see that the questions from current affairs start to dip down from 37 to 33, the cutoff also dips down, but a little more mildly. Thereafter, you start to see that the cutoffs are dipping down furthermore as the questions based in current affairs are also starting to dip down a little bit, but it's not a significant change. However, the cutoffs are changing from a 116 to about a 98. The reason therein could be that if you look at questions from the conventional sections, questions from ancient and medieval history, questions from modern history and art and culture, if you take this as a singular block, in this singular block, the number of questions by and large have remained almost constant. If you can see it here, 4 plus 8 plus 3 is 15, followed by another 16 questions, followed by roughly around 14 questions. So the range is broadly the same. The range is the same. However, questions started being asked from non-conventional sources. Now, every time you start to find that there are questions which are coming from non-conventional sources, quite obviously, aspirants or serious aspirants who have invested a lot of their time reading and revising their conventional sources will also find it a little difficult to attempt these questions. So one of the probable reasons could also be that UPSC decided to switch over from conventional sources to rather non-conventional sources and also are trying to reduce the number of current affairs based questions. Now, interestingly enough, the cutoff has been declining ever since, goes from 98 till about 92.51, then it drops down to 87.54, then it drops down to roughly around 82, then 75. And if you can clearly see here that the number of questions from current affairs has also started to decline. The other interesting aspect in here is that questions were asked from current affairs, but they were not directly linked to the current affairs as you must be reading them in the news. There were questions which were associated with events as were mentioned in the newspapers. And alongside, we also witnessed that in the last 5 odd years, the kind of questions which were being asked, the structure of questions also started to change a little bit. For instance, previously you had questions wherein aspirants had become rather good at eliminating certain options. When they would ask you questions, they would give you a certain few statements and they would ask you if only A is correct, only B, C and D are correct, only A and D are correct, none of them are correct, all of them are correct. Candidates had worked their way around these type of questions. So they essentially changed the format of the question itself. Now they started to ask you how many of these statements are correct rather than asking you which of these statements are correct. If only one statement is correct, only 2 are correct, all 3 are correct, none of them are correct. So that was a change in the structure of the questions that they started to ask you. So the format of the questions being changed, then the sources of the questions being changed, quite obviously led to a sharp decline in the cutoffs for the successive years to follow. You also would want to notice in here that the questions which are based out of current affairs, directly from current affairs, have also reduced significantly, especially since the year 2016. Now, these could be probable reasons as to why the cutoffs have been declining sharply. Now, for you, what is important is that you should always know what was the cutoff last year, what was the cutoff in the year previous to that, and so on and so forth. Now, once you have looked at previous year's question papers, as well as you now know what the cutoff for each year was, this is followed by the next step. What is the next step? The next step is what kind of questions were asked in the previous year's question papers. Now, fundamentally speaking, there are 2 important aspects when it comes to questions. First important aspect is the type of questions that UPSC normally is interested in. The second important aspect is the sources of these questions. We'll take them both one by one. We'll start with the types of questions. Now, essentially speaking, many questions would be there, but you can categorize these questions into 3 broad categories. The first category is one where you are required to have information about the facts presented in the question, as well as you should be able to apply some common sense, apply some logic and your understanding to those questions to get to the right answer. The second type of question would be a question which only is essentially about information. So if you know that aspect, great. If you don't know that aspect, the chances of you getting that question right are rather low. Then there will be questions wherein there may be some information that you don't know, but if you use common sense or if you use some reasoning, some understanding, some logic, you will be able to eliminate some options and get to the right answer. Now, since I'm the faculty of Indian economy, I'm going to be showing you these questions from previous year's papers itself, specifically from the section of Indian economy. Let's look at the first type of question. The first type of question, this is 2023 UPSC previous year's question paper 2023 for Indian economy. The first question that is asked in here is, which of the following activities of the Reserve Bank of India is considered to be a part of sterilization? Now, ideally speaking, this is a question which is precisely an information-based question. That means if you know what sterilization is, you will be easily able to pick up what the answer to this question would be, because there is rather little scope for eliminating some options. But this is also a question where not just information, some amount of understanding may also be required. Now, what aspect is sterilization? You should know that RBI is your central monetary authority, and RBI has many functions. These functions will always include something called a price stability function. And another function of RBI is what we call forex management. Sterilization is a mix of both of these. You can imagine a scenario wherein, imagine that there is a lot of funds which are incoming. Imagine that FDI inflows in the country have increased. Now, because dollar inflow in the country has increased, if you plot this demand and supply model for dollars, you clearly would know that the supply curve of dollar has increased. This means that the exchange rate for dollars will decline. Conversely speaking, your currency, which is rupee in this case, is appreciating because there is more supply of dollars. That means people are willing to dump their dollars in favor of your rupee. There is more demand for rupee, more supply of dollars, resulting in appreciation or the rupee strengthening in comparison with what? With the dollar. Now, RBI normally allows the exchange rate to float. This is what we call a managed float system. However, in periods of excessive fluctuations, which means if there is strong appreciating currents or there are strong depreciating currents, RBI also intervenes in the open market to stabilize these exchange rates. Now, how will RBI intervene in this market to stabilize these exchange rates? RBI is going to buy these excess dollars. When RBI buys excess dollars, what essentially it is doing is, it is bringing the supply curve back to the left and pushing the exchange rate back to where it was previously. This is what RBI essentially is doing as part of its forex management function. The problem here is, when RBI buys these excess dollars, it is buying these excess dollars by giving rupees in return. That means in the economy, because of RBI undertaking its forex management function, RBI is increasing the supply of rupee in the economy. If rupee supply increases in the economy, if there is more money chasing the same number of goods and services, this creates what is called an inflationary pressure. And since price stability is one of the most important functions of the RBI, in here will the RBI now intervene to stabilize prices. How does the RBI intervene to stabilize prices? RBI is going to absorb this excess supply of rupees by selling bonds into the open markets. RBI sells bonds in the open market. These are also called stabilization bonds to absorb this excess rupee, just so the prices are stabilized. Now, this entire process is what is called sterilization operation. Sterilization, why? Because in pursuit of one of the functions of RBI, which is forex management, RBI tweaked the market conditions such that there emerged inflationary pressures. And to counter these inflationary pressures, RBI had to absorb this excess supply of rupee in the market by doing what? By selling bonds in the open market, selling bonds and absorbing this excess rupee just so prices are stabilized. That means the side effect of one of its functions was sterilized by another one of its functions, which is an open market operation. RBI is selling bonds in the open market. Now, this is essentially what is called sterilization. Now, ideally speaking, this is a question which has come from NCERT's straight up. If you read your macroeconomics NCERT, you will find that sterilization has been mentioned there and also explained in a good amount of detail. So this is a question essentially based on information, and if you have been thorough with your basic books, you are not going to get this question wrong. Now, as part of these options, you have conducting open market operations. The second is oversight of settlement and payment systems, debt and cash management for the central and state governments, regulating the functions of the non-banking financial institutions. If only you know the basic functions of RBI, you would know that this function is one that of the regulatory and supervisory functions of the RBI. This function is what is called the debt management function of the RBI, which comes as a part of RBI being the banker to the government. Now, this function is an allied function of the RBI, which is the management of payment and settlement systems, leaving you with only the option A, which is conducting open market operations. थोड़ा ना 5 मिनट back करके. Question is a question which is essentially based on information, might require some amount of understanding. Let's look at the second type of question, which is where once again you will be required to know something and you will be also required to apply your understanding to the question. And in the same year, another question was asked from the Indian economy section, which is consider the following markets, and he has given you options for 4, and he is asking you how many of the above are included in the capital markets. Now, the knowledge or the information aspect of this question is that you should know what capital markets are. Now, broadly speaking, you will be studying about what is called financial markets, and there are many classifications of the financial markets. One classification of the financial markets is on the basis of tenure for which you require the money. If the tenure is for a period of up to 1 year, then all the instruments will become a part of what is called the money market. And if the tenure is longer than 1 year, then all the instruments will become a part of the market which is called capital market. Now, once you know what capital markets are, you only have to look at these markets and assess whether they will be a part of this or they will be a part of this, and basis that information, you will be able to eliminate some options. Now, the first option in here is the government bond market. Now, you should know what government bonds are. Government bonds, also called as dated government securities, are securities which are issued by the government precisely when it needs funds for the long term, which is to say, term which is usually more than 1 year. Typically, the range is between 5 to 40 odd years. Now, since the normal range is between 5 to 40 odd years, it is definitely greater than 1 year. Therefore, government bond market is likely a part of the capital markets, which it is. The second is call money market. Now, the word itself says call money market. It's a part of the interbank money market, wherein banks, when they face some temporary liquidity crisis, ring up other banks and ask money for a very, very short duration. There is something called call money, there is something called notice money, there is something called term money. Call money is where banks require money from other banks for a period of only 1 day. Therefore, call money market, will it be a part of the capital markets? Absolutely not. And if call money market is not a part of the capital markets, clearly speaking, all 4 cannot be an answer. That means the answer is either only 1, only 2, or only 3. All 4 cannot be the answer. The next is treasury bill markets. Now, once again, treasury bills are also government securities, just that treasury bills are government securities which are issued for a period of less than 1 year. That means these are essentially speaking of the same nature of dated government securities. That means they will be carrying the name of the issuer, they'll be carrying the face value, they'll be carrying the coupon payments. However, the term to maturity will always be less than 1 year. Typically, this is for a period of 91 days, sometimes even 182 odd days, right? This is what treasury bill market is all about. Now, treasury bill market, since it's issued for a maturity of less than 1 year, will also not be a part of the capital markets. That means, will capital markets include treasury bill markets? Absolutely not. That means, can the option be only 3? No. Now, the correct answer only can be option A or option B, which is only 1 or only 2. The last is the stock market. And even if you have a commonsensical understanding of the stock market, in the stock market, you can always trade intraday, you can trade or you can do what is called swing trading, or you can invest your money for a longer duration of time also. Now, stock market is one of the primary components of your capital markets. So clearly speaking, stock market will be a part of the capital markets, so will the government bond market. That means the answer to this question is only 2. Now, this type of a question primarily relies on your awareness, relies on your information or your knowledge about the financial markets, specifically how they are structured in the country. Once again, a question, primarily based on knowledge, some amount of application of understanding. Let's look at the third type of question. Now, this type of question essentially is about information. The question says, the government of India, consider the following statements. The first one is, the government of India provides MSP, minimum support price, for Niger seeds. The second statement is, Niger is cultivated as a kharif crop. And the third statement is, some tribal people in India use Niger seed for oil for cooking. Now, how many of the above statements are correct? And this is also a changed format of the questions. Previously, they used to ask you if only 1 and 3 are correct, only 2 and 3 are correct, only 1 and 3 are correct, all 3 are correct, or none of them are correct. Nowadays, they have changed the format of the questions. They have started to ask you if only 1 of these statements is correct, only 2 of these statements are correct, or all 3 are correct, or none of them are correct, without pointing out which one is correct and which one is not. Now, ideally speaking, elimination is still going to apply to this question. However, this question requires you to have requires you to have knowledge of the minimum support prices or the price support system of the government. Now, ideally speaking, there are some things which are essential to know about MSP. MSP in the country is announced for a total of 22 commodities. Quite obviously, these 22 commodities could be very, very hard for people to remember. What you should know is a broader classification. Out of these 22 commodities, 14 commodities are kharif crops, 6 commodities are rabi season crops, and 2 commodities are what we call calendar year crops. Now, it's hard for you to remember all 22 commodities. However, what you should do is at least try to remember 8. Now, in these 8 commodities, the 6 rabi season crops will include, there will be wheat, there will be barley, there will be masoor, there will be mustard, there will be safflower, and there is gram. Wheat, barley, gram, safflower, mustard, and masoor pulses. Now, if you know that Niger seeds are not a part of these 6 rabi crops, this is followed by either 2 options. This could be a part of the 14 kharif crops or could be a part of the 2 calendar year crops. The calendar year crops are also easy to remember. This is jute and this is copra. If you did not remember all 22 commodities, but you remembered 8 of these, and even if not 8, if you remembered 6 of these, there are high chances that if MSP is announced for Niger seeds, then Niger seed would be cultivated as a kharif crop because it clearly is not a part of this aspect. Now, firstly, the government of India provides MSP for Niger seeds. You should know that out of these 22 commodities, primarily these commodities for which MSP is announced is either food grains, pulses, oil seeds, and some commercial crops such as jute, such as cotton. Now, MSP is primarily announced for food grains, it is announced for pulses, it is announced for oil seeds. Now, he has itself mentioned that Niger seeds, then he mentioned that Niger oil is used for cooking by some tribal people in the country. Now, if you know that the government does announce MSP for Niger seeds, great. If you don't know that, but if you remember that Niger seeds were not a part of the rabi crops or the calendar year crops, then clearly statement 2 is likely to be correct. The third statement is some tribal people in India use Niger seed oil for cooking. Now, most likely oil seeds over which MSP would be announced should be oil seeds which are primarily used for cooking purposes itself. The first aspect is the government of India provides MSP for Niger seeds or not. Now, this is information that you should either know or that you will either know or you will just not know. Ideally speaking, you should know this because MSP is a very, very important component of your syllabus. So, even if you don't know this, you should likely know that yes, Niger seed could be or is very likely to be cultivated as a kharif crop. And the second aspect is that some tribal people in India could use this Niger seed oil for cooking purposes. That means there is a high chance that 2 options are correct. The only case in this point will be that none will most likely not be correct. because Niger most likely is a Kharif crop. It's not a Rabi crop. It's not a calendar year crop. Now, if you have eliminated one option, that means the answer lies in A, B, or C. Now, since this is a question which is essentially about information, does not use a lot of logic, there are high chances that you may get it right. There are high chances that you may get it wrong, depending upon how well you are prepared. Ideally speaking, since the question which comes from MSP, which is a significant component of your syllabus, you should not be getting those questions wrong. The answer to this question is all three. That yes, the government of India announces MSP for Niger seeds. Niger is not a part of either your Rabi season crops or your calendar year crops. Niger is a part of the Kharif season crops. And the third aspect, which is most likely, is since government announces MSPs primarily for food grains, for pulses, for oil seeds, these oil seeds are mostly used for edible purposes only. Most likely, option 3 will also be correct. So you go for all three. Right, now this is a question which is essentially based out of information, not a lot of scope for you to apply common sense or even apply logic for that matter. The next type of question is one where the question is essentially about information. This is also a changed format of the question. However, even if you do not know this information, you will be able to get this question right only and only if you apply some amount of common sense and you know how to navigate an objective type paper. Now consider this question. He says, consider the following two statements, statement 1 and statement 2. Which of the following is correct in respect of the above statements? And it is then followed by your options. These options are both statements 1 and 2 are correct and statement 2 is the correct explanation of statement 1. The second option is both statement 1 and 2 are correct and statement 2 is not the correct explanation of the statement number 1. C is statement 1 is correct but statement 2 is incorrect, and D is statement 1 is incorrect and statement 2 is correct. Now, even if you do not know this question, I will show you how do you navigate this type of question and how do you increase your chances of getting this question right. The first statement says, in the post-pandemic recent past, many central banks worldwide had carried out interest rate hikes. Now, this is a question which requires awareness. And since this is a question which is standard current affairs based question, I am expecting that most serious candidates would know this. The next is, central banks generally assume that they have the ability to counteract rising consumer prices via monetary policy means. Now, this is a question which does not require so much information as it requires some amount of understanding. If you know RBI and its functions, you also can extrapolate that to other central banks in the world. You should know that monetary policy is the preserve of central banks or central monetary authorities of various countries of the world. And what is monetary policy? Monetary policy is a policy prerogative or a policy tool which is applied by the central monetary authorities or the central banks of multiple economies precisely to influence what is called money supply with the main aim of countering inflation. It's not the only aim, but it's the main aim. The aim is one that of price stability. Similarly, in India, RBI has a broader function which is called the price stability function, and in pursuit of RBI meeting its price stability function, RBI has two tools at its disposal. One tool is called the monetary policy and the second tool is called its open market operations. Now, monetary policy has both quantitative tools and qualitative tools. In terms of quantitative tools, precisely these are interest rates at the disposal of the central bank, wherein the central bank will carry out or will influence the interest rates either to make money dear or more expensive or to make money cheaper, depending upon what is the current price situation in the economy. So when you read statement number 2, it says central banks generally assume that they have the ability to counteract rising consumer prices. That means they have the ability to counteract inflation by using monetary policy means. You should know, any serious aspirant would know that this is a correct statement. And if statement 2 is correct, that means there is a scope for me to eliminate a certain few options. One option that can be straight up eliminated is that statement 1 is correct and statement 2 is incorrect, because clearly statement 2 is correct. You may have information on statement 1 or you may not, but statement 2 is something that any serious aspirant, even if you're not a serious aspirant, but you have read Indian economy, you will know that statement 2 is absolutely correct. Now, if statement 2 is correct, then C option has straight up been eliminated. That means the answer lies between A, B, and C. Now think counterintuitively. If statement 2 is correct, which is central banks generally assume that they have the ability to counteract rising consumer prices via monetary policy means, is that a good explanation for statement 1? Statement 1 says, in the post-pandemic recent past, many central banks worldwide had carried out interest rate hikes. Central banks carrying out interest rates hike would mean that the central banks are now creating what is called a dear money regime. That means they do not want easy availability of money in the market. They clearly are disturbed by inflation, and what they are trying to create here is they are trying to rise the interest rates so that it becomes expensive for people to borrow money, just so money supply in the economy can be reduced to counteract inflation. That means if statement 2 is correct, it looks like it could be a good explanation for statement 1 only and only if there were inflationary pressures in the post-pandemic world in the recent past. Now, if you were aware of statement number 1, or you can say if you have read about statement number 1, you will clearly know that in the pandemic, quite a lot of people delayed their consumption decisions because they were uncertain about what is going to be the future. Once those regulations, those restrictions were removed, it led to what is called a rise in the pent-up demand. That means people who were up until now holding their money, not knowing when they should be spending it or over which item should they be spending it. Now that the situation has been normalized, many people are now starting to demand things. Now, if there is a greater demand, while the supply of goods and services remains the same, that means there is more money chasing the same number of goods and services, which will create an inflationary pressure. And if there is an inflationary pressure, quite obviously central banks will try to counteract that inflation by carrying out interest rate hikes. That means if statement 2 is correct, it is also a good explanation of statement 1. So, option B, which is both statement 1 and 2 are correct, and statement 2 is not the correct explanation of statement 1. This also you can eliminate, leaving you with only 2 options, which is both statement 1 and 2 are correct, and statement 2 is the correct explanation of statement 1. And the last option is statement 1 is incorrect and statement 2 is correct, because factually statement 1 could be incorrect. Here, you have to finally rely on whether you know that this was correct or not. And if you have been a decent student of current affairs, you would know that in the post-pandemic world, there was something called the emergence of pent-up demand. Many people who had not spent their money during COVID because there was a lot of uncertainty. Once the uncertainty was removed, quite obviously, it led to people making those consumption decisions, finally coming to the markets, wanting to buy things, which led to inflationary pressures. Consequently, central banks around the world carried out interest rate hikes, essentially to cut down on the money supply by making money more expensive. So, the most likely answer to this question will be option A. However, even if you're stuck between A and D, you should know that you have increased your possibility of getting this question right from 1/4 to about 50% chance of getting this question right. Now, this is a question wherein there is some element of knowledge. However, if you use common sense, if you only know what monetary policy is, what is it used for, most likely you're going to come down to the right answer for this question, even if you don't know whether statement 1 is correct or not. Leaving us with the last type of question, which is this one, which is say, with reference to National Investment and Infrastructure Fund, which of the following statements are correct? Now, this used to be the most common type of questions where they will ask you only one statement is correct, statement 2 is correct, both 1 and 2 are correct, or neither 1 nor 2 are correct. Now, once again, this is a question which is essentially information based. However, if you are good with common sense, you are going to get this question most likely right. Now, read this. He's asking you whether NIIF is an organ of the NITI Aayog or not. Now, NITI Aayog is a body which replaced the Planning Commission. Why should NITI Aayog be in charge of a corpus of funds meant essentially for investment in infrastructure? Now, this is most likely incorrect. However, this is one wherein you may either know it or you don't know it. But if you look at option 2 says it has a corpus of 4 lakh crores at present. This is a question from 2017. when you look at a number like this, if you have been reading the budget statements, you will know certain few numbers. For example, an interesting number that I can tell you is that even if you look at this year's budget, India's total expenditure or total proposed expenditure this year is going to be 50 lakh crores. Out of this total expenditure, only about 16% goes towards all central sector schemes. Only about 16%, and 8% goes towards centrally sponsored schemes. That means roughly 1/4 of the money of total expenditure in India goes towards all central sector schemes as well as centrally sponsored schemes. Now, if you take 1/4 of 50 lakhs, this is closer to around 12 lakh crores. Now, if 12 lakh crores is your expenditure across all central sector and centrally sponsored schemes, do you not think it's highly unlikely that one fund which has been created essentially for investment in infrastructure will be 1/3 of this value? Now, 1/3 of 12 lakh crores, which is all of your expenditure, proposed expenditure on centrally sponsored schemes as well as central sector schemes, can this be money which forms a corpus of a singular fund? It is a highly unlikely, you can say, answer to this question. Now, clearly, if you know this commonsensically, whenever you read your budget statements, if you look at those numbers, you don't have to remember those numbers, but broadly, if you look at what the tax revenues in the country have been, what have been the non-tax receipts in the country, what is our total expenditure, broadly speaking, what kind of expenditure do we make on different subsegments, you don't have to remember them each one by one. Right? Even if you remember rough ballparks, you will be able to place that this information, this number which has been presented, this is far too much to be invested in a singular fund. Right? Quite obviously, this is a wrong statement. In fact, the corpus for NIIF back in the day was 40,000 crores, not 4 lakh crores. 4 lakh crores is an abnormally huge number. And if you have general common sense in terms of looking at what the total expenditure of the country is, can one fund be comprising of such a huge part of your total expenditure? You will most likely mark 2 as wrong. And if 2 is wrong, that means B cannot be the answer. Both 1 and 2 cannot be the answer, leaving you with 2 options, which is 1 only, and D, which is neither 1 nor 2. That means your possibility of getting this question right has increased from 25% to 50%. Now, if you look at option 1, it says it's an organ of the 𝐑𝐄𝐿 Aayog. Quite obviously, this makes very little sense that there is a body which was set up precisely to replace the Planning Commission, and Planning Commission will have a body to invest in investment in infrastructure. It's a different subspecialty of its own. Most likely, it will not be a organ of the 𝐑𝐄𝐿 Aayog. It indeed is an alternate investment fund. Commonsensically, you should know that this would not be a part of the 𝐑𝐄𝐿 Aayog, most likely. However, once again, like I said, this part is purely information based. Now, most likely the answer to this question would be neither 1 nor 2, which it is. Now, if you look at the kind of questions that we have discussed, if you look at question number 1, this is question which is directly asked from your NCERT itself, primarily information-based question. If you look at this question, once again, this is a question which should be a part of your essential reading material. Therefore, you're not required to get this wrong. Requires some amount of information and some application of understanding. If you look at the third type of question, once again, a question which is precisely based on information and information alone. However, there is some scope of you to use some common sense in here. And if you look at this type of a question, once again, a question based on information. However, if you use your logic and your common sense, there is every way that you're going to get this question right. Now, if you look at the last type of question, once again, if you are aware of this particular dimension, if you know some bit about the numbers of the government and its budgets, most likely you are going to raise your possibility of getting this question right. Now, these are broadly the three type of questions which are asked. Questions based primarily on knowledge, questions based on knowledge and understanding, and questions based essentially on information. But if you apply some common sense, some logic to those questions, you will most likely get that question right. Now, the second element and which is usually the most important element for people who are appearing for prelims examination, is how many questions to attempt and which questions to attempt. In fact, which candidate is most likely to clear this prelims examination is one who knows how many questions you should attempt and which questions should you be attempting, which questions should you not be attempting. I've tried to construct a matrix for you to make it very simple. Now, like I said, there are three types of questions: questions which require only awareness, questions which require both awareness as well as understanding, and questions wherein you can use some sense of logic to get the question right. Now, this is one aspect of the entire game. Another aspect of the game is what has been the source of these questions. Now, the sources broadly I can categorize into three parts. One is the mandatory material. The second is the reference material or the most common reference material. And the third is miscellaneous or random reading. Now, if you take my subject itself, if you take economy, what will be the part of the mandatory material in economy? If you are a part of any foundation course, then the mandatory material will include classroom material. Mandatory material will also require NCERT for macroeconomics. Mandatory material will include your economic survey, a summary of the budget document, plus current affairs from the most common any one of these two newspapers, which is either the Hindu or the Indian Express. This is mandatory material. That means any person who's a serious aspirant definitely has to read and revise each one of these. Their classroom material, their NCERTs for macroeconomics, then there is economic survey followed by the budget, as well as current affairs as they happen throughout the year. This is a part of the mandatory material which you just cannot skip. The second aspect is reference reading. Now, there are many books in the market. Sometimes what you may find is maybe in the classroom or maybe in your notes, you did not or you were not satisfied by the amount of depth given to a certain topic, or some topics were just not covered. Maybe they were left uncovered. Maybe they were not covered in such great depth, for which you require some reference material. The bottom line in here is that you do not have to read the reference material from cover to cover, only for those topics where you yourself feel underconfident in terms of your level of understanding or in terms of your level of preparation, or your notes have not gotten them covered. Only for those topics you have to have some reference material, right? Pick any book in the market which is subscribed to by most aspirants, right? Which is to say, when most serious aspirants are definitely going to read that reference material, you should also have that reference material as well. Followed by some miscellaneous reading and some random reading. That means this was not a part of your classroom material. It was not covered by the NCERTs. It was not there in the economic survey. It was not there in the budget. It was not there in your standard newspapers. It is some random piece of information, and this random piece of information came from multiple sources, allied sources, which you could not cover. Now, if there is a question which is based only on information, and this question has come from your mandatory material, that means any of these, no serious aspirant is going to get them wrong. Therefore, you do not have to get them wrong. Similarly, if it's a question which requires not just information but also understanding, however, the source of this question was your mandatory material, you are not supposed to get them wrong. Similarly, if there is a question wherein you may not know about the current event, but you understand that phenomenon and you can apply some logic to that statement and get the question right, any serious aspirant is going to most likely get that question right as well. Followed by questions which are based on information, however, they have come from your reference reading. Pick one book which you feel is something which is read by most aspirants. That means a serious aspirant is not going to get that question wrong. You should not get that question wrong either. Followed by question which requires not just knowledge but also understanding. It has come from a reference reading, a common reference reading or a most popular reference reading. Most likely a serious aspirant is not going to get this wrong. Therefore, you do not have to get this wrong. The questions that you should be filtering out are questions which have come from reference reading, which require some understanding of the concept which was not covered in your standard material. For example, a few years back, there was a question on tax buoyancy, although the term was there in the news. However, the concept was not, you can say, typically does not get elaborated in your classes also. Now, one such question which requires you to apply some understanding or apply logic, but has come from a section which is not a part of your mandatory material, ideally speaking, you should attempt those questions, but you can also filter them out. Now, there are questions which are based essentially on information, but have come from random reading or random resources, questions based on knowledge and understanding, but have come from random resources, questions which require you to apply logic, but have not come from standard resources. These are the questions that you should be filtering out. That means this part of the matrix are questions which you should try to not get wrong. Why? Because no serious aspirant is going to get these questions wrong. That means the efficacy in these questions should be rather high if you want to be competing at the highest level. Now, these are questions which are going to be tricky for all aspirants, including serious aspirants. Therefore, some of these questions you may try to attempt, some of these questions you may even skip. Now, this is the composition of any prelims examination. What makes a prelims examination simple, what makes a prelims examination difficult is essentially this component. If you have more of these types of questions wherein we have this filtration wala mark, if you have more of these questions, ideally the paper is on the more difficult side. If you have more of these types of questions, then the paper is essentially on the simpler lines. Depending upon which type of questions are more, which type of questions are less, you have to move to the next step, which is try to simulate a test experience and try to formulate a strategy for yourself. And in this strategy, what should be absolutely important for you is you should know how to calibrate your attempts. Ideally speaking, you should be attempting all these questions wherein you find the tick mark and try to not get them wrong. You should be attempting these questions also, right? There is an element of luck. I'll explain to you what the math behind that process essentially is, which is where I tell you or I discuss what is called calibration of your attempt. Now, subscribe to any test series, subscribe to a test series wherein you will be allowed to practice many tests. And in these test series, try to focus on this strategy, which is what is called the calibration of your attempts. What does this strategy mean? Now, firstly, whenever you get a question paper, this question paper ideally should be attempted in 3 phases. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. Phase 1 is where you find all such questions that have come from standard sources and all such questions where there is a high likelihood of you getting the question right. That means in these phases, Phase 1 specifically are questions that you are most likely going to mark as correct. Phase 2 is where you attempt such questions where you are able to eliminate 2 options. And Phase 3 is where you attempt such questions only where you are able to eliminate just 1 option. There are 3 phases in which you should be attempting any prelims examination. First, look for all those questions that you know answers to or where you're reasonably sure that you know the answer to those questions. Every time you pick up a question paper, try to remember which year's question paper is it the most similar to. If it is similar to the 2016 question paper, if it is similar to the 2019 question paper in terms of composition, in terms of level of difficulty, that gives you a standard reference point. For example, you pick up a question paper and this question paper is very similar to the question paper as was the case in 2022. Now in 2022, what was the cutoff like? Right, in 2023, the cutoff was 70, it was in the 70s, 75 point something. In 2022, the cutoff was closer to the 87 mark. That means if my question paper is similar to the one which was there in 2022, most likely the cutoff will be hovering around the 87, 88 marks. And usually the cutoffs year on year should increase. That means broadly you have an idea what the cutoff is going to be like. Add some more just for safety, add roughly around 5 marks more for your safety. That means most likely the cutoff is going to be around 93 odd, if it is very similar to the question paper as was the case in 2022. Now this is what you are expecting to be the cutoff. Therefore, if you have to clear this examination, you should give yourself another buffer just so you want to be safe. For example, add 10 more marks to it. and tell yourself that if I want to clear this examination, this particular test, which is very similar to the one which appeared in 2022, my safe score is 103. Now, when you have a reasonable estimate of what your safe score is going to be like, then go attempting it phase-wise. In phase number 1, find all those questions, count them, those questions which are most likely going to be correct for you. Now, in 2015, 16, 17, 18, before 2019, typically this number for brilliant aspirants, for very serious aspirants, this number used to be around 40%. That means roughly around 40 questions that they knew answers to. Now, this number has significantly dipped down since 2019 onwards. Right now, this number would be hovering between 25 to 30 odd. That means, imagine that you find 30 questions where you are absolutely sure, or where you are very, very sure that you're going to get those questions right. Now, always work with the assumption that even if you think 30 questions you're going to get right, some of them you will definitely get wrong because of one or the other error. That means in 30 questions, most likely on a good day, you're going to get 25 questions right and roughly 5 questions wrong. 25 questions right is going to give you 50 marks. 5 questions wrong is going to give you 10 divided by 3 minus 3.3. That means your score roughly is going to be around 46.7. Now, 46.7 is your expected score, and you are slightly, or not, in fact, not slightly, or significantly away from what you think is your safe score, which is 103. That means you have to attempt more questions. In the second phase, find all such questions where you are going to be eliminating 2 options. That means you read every question, try to eliminate options, and such questions where you are able to eliminate 2 options, you should take an informed guess in those questions too. Now, many of you aspirants think that the people who clear this examination are people who know many questions. You are absolutely wrong there. People who clear this examination persistently, every year, successively, are good at taking these objective type tests. That means they have a decent amount of information, but they also realize that there is some mathematics that goes behind attempting objective type question papers. Now, look at the mathematics here. Once you are able to eliminate 2 options, that means the possibility of getting the question right is 50%. Now, if you have 10 such questions, imagine that there are 10 questions. In 10 questions, if you get 3 right and 7 questions wrong, imagine that you are making an informed guess in 10 questions, 3 of them you got right, 7 of them you got wrong. 3 right are going to fetch you 6 marks. 7 wrong are going to fetch you 14 divided by 3, which will be roughly around 4 point something. That means there is a net addition of 1 point something. That means for every 10 questions that you make an informed guess at, even if you get 7 of those questions wrong and only 3 of them right, you are still landing yourself in some positive. Imagine you get 4 questions right and 6 questions wrong. 4 questions right is a positive 8. 6 questions wrong is 12 divided by 3. This is minus 4. That means you are going to add 4 more to your score. That means if you are making an informed guess in some questions, if you attempt more questions, there is a high chance that you are going to land yourself in the positives. If you find roughly around 30 such questions where you are able to eliminate 2 options, on a very, very good day, you are going to get roughly around 50% of them right and 50% of them wrong. 15 right is going to fetch you 30 marks, 15 wrong is going to fetch you minus 10. That means, roughly speaking, you're going to add 20 more to your score. So you have increased your score from 46.7 till about 66.7. This is how you incrementally increase your score. In the first go, you attempted 30 questions wherein you are sure that you are going to get this question right. Now, in the next phase, depending upon how well you are prepared, right, typically you're going to get somewhere around 30 to 40 odd questions where you're going to be able to eliminate 2 odd options, thereby raising your possibility of getting the question right by 50%. And in these questions, if you have a great day, half of these questions you're going to get right, half of these questions you're going to get wrong. Even if you get 10 right and 20 wrong, 10 right, that means 20 marks, 20 wrong, that means minus 13. 40 divided by 3 minus 13, that means you're still going to land yourself in positives. Imagine that more questions you attempt and better you get at making informed guesses, there is a high likelihood that you're going to add to your score. And in any competitive examination, every mark that you get extra, you should add it to your total. Therefore, do not shy away from attempting more questions. Do not shy away from making informed guesses. In fact, the better you are prepared, you're going to find more of these questions than these questions. Phase 3 is where you decide whether you want to attempt these questions or not, depending upon how far you are from your safe score. If your safe score is 103, and so far on a good day you have managed to get somewhere around 70 odd marks, right? Clearly you are going to then require to attempt these questions too. In questions where you're going to eliminate only one option, that means the possibility of getting this question right is now 1 by 3. If you find roughly around, let's say 30 of these questions, on a very, very good day, amongst these 30 questions, you're going to get somewhere around 10 right and 20 wrong. 10 right is going to fetch you a positive 20, 20 wrong is going to fetch you minus 13. That means you're going to add somewhere around 7 to your score furthermore. That means you are inching closer and closer to your safe score. This is the idea behind calibrating your attempts. That means every paper that you attempt, first thing what you want to do is you want to imagine which year's question paper is it the closest to, what was the cutoff for that year, add some marks to that cutoff just to be safe, to imagine what could be the reasonable cutoff this year. For example, if the cutoff is, let's say, 90, add 5 more marks to it. You imagine that the cutoff this year could be 95. Then to be extra safe, you add another buffer of 10 odd marks, right? To 95, you add another 10 more. That means 105. 105 is your target safe score. Now, count all those questions where you're going to be absolutely right. If those questions are roughly between 30 to 40%, great for you. Then, since you are away from your safe score, should you be attempting more questions? Absolutely. In the second phase, look for those questions where you can eliminate 2 options, and please attempt these questions also, because on a very, very good day, you are going to get a lot of positive totals to your score. If you are further away from your safe score, then you should be taking further more chances and even attempting questions where you can eliminate only one option. But it depends largely upon how far you are from your safe score. Now remember, all of this is happening in your head and all of this has to be decided on the D-Day itself. Therefore, do not do this straight in your real prelims examination. Try to subscribe to a test series and figure out what kind of a candidate you are. How many questions are safe enough for you? How many questions, or you can say, if there is some pressure which gets applied to you, do you normally get the question right or do you get the question wrong? What is your scenario? What kind of a candidate you are? Now, ideally speaking, this brings us to the million-dollar question, which is how many questions to attempt. Now, ideally speaking, if you look at the question papers, which were very similar to the ones in 2016 to about 19, in those years, typically the number of questions to be attempted usually lay around somewhere around 80 to 90. Now, that number has significantly been brought down, precisely because questions are now coming from non-conventional sources. They have also changed the format of the questions, throwing a curveball at the aspirants. Therefore, the number of questions should be roughly between 70 to 80, but none less than 70 odd. However, like I said, there is no set answer to this question. This answer has to be figured out in the exam hall itself, depending upon which year's question paper does it look similar to, what do you think could be the cutoff, what do you think is a safe score, how many questions do you know, how many questions can you eliminate 2 options in, how many questions you can eliminate 1 option in, right? Depending upon what the composition here is, and depending upon whether you have simulated the same experience in your test series, you will be able to place what is a good enough number of questions for you to be attempting, just so you want to be safe at clearing the prelims examination. Now, once again, like I said, please remember one thing and please try to internalize it. The more questions you attempt, the greater the chance for you to land in positives. For every 10 informed guesses you make, even if you get 3 of them right and 7 of them wrong, which is usually something that you can do any time of the day, right, you are still going to land yourself in positives. Depending upon how many of these informed guesses are correct and how many are wrong, there is a high likelihood that you're going to land yourself in positive. So never shy away from attempting more questions. This should be the bottom line. If you want to clear this examination, clearly you should be attempting more such questions, not less, right? Try not to be too safe, too conservative when you are going for your prelims examination. Now, the last thing is about analyzing your score. Now, one common mistake that most aspirants make is that they only look at their scores. They do not analyze their scores. Now, if you are following this approach where you're calibrating your attempts, there will be aspirants, there will be candidates, whenever they are looking at their score sheet, they will only look at the marks and they will compare it with the highest, and they will either get disheartened or they will be elated based on their performance. That's not what the purpose of test series is. The purpose of test series is to understand yourself as an aspirant by doing a detailed analysis of your score. What that means is, every time you look at your score, try to look at the number of questions, number of correct answers, and number of incorrect answers. When you're looking at the number of correct answers in these questions, try to see whether these were questions that you knew or these were questions where you made an informed guess. If these were questions that you knew, please try to confirm whether they are right because of the same logic that you applied, or they are right for other reasons. Many times this happens is then you use the wrong formula but you get to the right answer. Just because your answer is right, you're not going to be analyzing whether whatever you thought was the reason behind that option to be selected, was that the actual reason or not. This is going to take far lesser time, those questions which you knew answers to and were also right. Then followed by questions where you made an informed guess and you got the question right. Please look at the explanation also, and please try to assess and internalize what was the correct reason for that question to be, or for that option to be selected. Now, please do this. Followed by the number of incorrect answers. Now, in these incorrect answers, once again, look at questions that you knew your answers to and questions where you made an informed guess. If there is a question that you knew the answer to and yet you got it wrong, please try to understand why you got that question wrong. Typically, one of the more common mistakes that candidates make in here is that they have not read the question. The question says which of these statements are not correct. What you read in the thick of things, you read the question as which of these statements are correct and you proceeded with your answer. This is a very, very common silly mistake. Sometimes you skip some details, sometimes you're in a rush. Try to understand what was the exact reason as to why you got a certain question wrong despite you knowing it. Followed by such questions wherein you made an informed guess and you got the question wrong. Don't panic because of those. Only try to understand what the reason was. If the reason is related to information, that means you did not know that information, you were just making a wild guess, right? In which case, it does not hurt you. Just read that information and try to internalize it, make it a part of your notes. If this is about logic, that your logic was wrong, try to see what the right logic for that question would always be, right? Always do this. Never panic. Most candidates, what they're going to do is they're going to be looking at questions where they were making an informed guess. Let's say they made informed guess in 10 odd questions. The first 3 of them they got wrong, and then they start to believe that I should not be making informed guesses. Remember this and please internalize this. If you are making informed guesses, and because of informed guesses, even if you got 6 of these guesses wrong and 4 of them right, you are still going to land yourself in the positives. And in a competitive examination, whatever helps you get or whatever helps you add more marks to your total, you should always do that, right? Don't get disheartened just because you got a certain few questions wrong. In fact, I would request you to get a lot of these questions wrong even in your test series, just so you learn beforehand. You should not be repeating the same mistakes in the actual examination, right? So analyzing your score is an absolutely important criterion. You should definitely not just look at your scores. You should be more interested in the trend lines. You should be interested in how many questions have you been attempting consistently. You should be looking at whether attempting more questions is helping you or not. You should be understanding whether in a pressure circumstance, what kind of a candidate are you? Do you bulge under pressure or do you perform better under pressure? You should always look at why you got a certain question right and why you got a certain question wrong. right? Not just be interested in the score, do a detailed analysis. And in fact, more the analysis you do before your prelims examination, the better understanding you would have of yourself as an aspirant. Right? This is all from my side when it comes to taking the prelims examination. Know that it's a very different beast. It's an objective type test paper. There are people who are consistently good at it, and there is a reason why they are good at it. Right? At the end, I would like to say only one thing, that in this examination, what is absolutely necessary is, yes, some amount of intelligence, but some amount of work ethic. All of this requires a lot of effort. All of this requires a lot of practice, consistent practice. It requires a lot of discipline. And only those who have a decent work ethic and a strategy will typically find themselves on the right side of luck. Having said that, I wrap up this session. I hope all of you had to learn or got to learn something from this session itself. Thank you. That was all from my side. Thank you. If you have any queries, you can always write to me at the following email address, which is ranchan.call@pw.live. This is all from my side. Wishing you good luck.